Tokyo has a new entry in its death toll, and public safety doesn't have a category for it yet. A being appeared over Special Division 4's eastern checkpoint tonight. Hair like gold flame, power readings that don't register on any fear index scale the agency has ever built, and in 4 minutes, he did to a devil what it takes entire hunter squads a full night to accomplish. They're calling him an anomaly. He would call that an insult. This is Vegeta, Prince of all Saiyans, second strongest being his own universe has ever produced, and he has just landed in a world that runs on fear instead of ki. A world where the strongest monster isn't measured in power level, but in how much dread it can make a nation feel. He doesn't know what a devil is. He doesn't care. He's about to make Chainsaw Man's world learn what he is, the hard way. Welcome back to Multiverse Saiyan, where the impossible crossovers you beg for in the comments actually happen. Written by Sam Palm. And if you've got a what if burning a hole in your head, drop it below, because we read every single one. Hit subscribe, smash that bell, and buckle in, because Vegeta just walked into a war he was never supposed to be part of, and he's about to make it his own. There is a version of every world where something arrives that should not exist within it, and Tokyo, on a rain-heavy Tuesday night in early autumn, became that version. The eastern checkpoint of Special Division 4's patrol grid ran along a stretch of elevated highway near Minato, a corridor of concrete pillars and sodium light, where devils sometimes crossed from the older, hungrier districts into the newer ones. Officer Ryosuke Tanabe had drawn checkpoint duty for the 11th night running, a posting that meant long hours of nothing, punctuated by the occasional stray fiend wandering too close to the barricades. He was 34 years old, had buried 2 partners in 6 years of service, and had learned that the job rewarded men who respected boredom rather than fought it. He was leaning against the hood of his car, thermos in hand, when the sky tore. It did not tear like a wound. It tore like something enormous being born, a single vertical fracture of white gold light splitting the clouds above the highway, and out of it fell a man. He did not fall the way things fall. He came down controlled, decelerating in the last 30 meters as though gravity were a suggestion he'd chosen, for the moment, to honor, and struck the asphalt hard enough to crater it, throwing a ring of shattered concrete and dust that rolled across 3 lanes and cracked the windshield of Tanabe's car 40 meters back. The light around him did not fade so much as fold inward, drawn back into his hair, which stood on end in a blazing spike of gold, and then dimmed to black as the glow left him, revealing a compact man in strange armor, standing in the crater with his arms loosely at his sides, and an expression of pure, contemptuous appraisal on his face. Tanabe had seen devils climb out of manholes wearing human faces like ill-fitting coats. He had seen a fiend eat its own arm to regrow it stronger. He had never seen anything look at Tokyo the way this man was looking at it now, not with hunger, not with the blank animal calculation devils wore, but with something closer to insult, as if the city itself had failed to impress him, and he intended to hold that against it personally. Freeze. Tanabe had his sidearm up before conscious thought caught up with reflex, years of training carrying his hands where his mind hadn't yet followed. Division 4. Identify yourself. The man's eyes, dark, sharp, entirely too aware, moved to him with the speed of dismissal rather than threat. He said something short and clipped in a language Tanabe's earpiece translator caught half a beat late, feeding the words to him distorted through the storm of adrenaline. This planet again. Then something came up out of the underpass behind him, and the night stopped being about the stranger at all. It had been 3 days since Division 4 lost contact with a maintenance crew working the underpass drainage tunnels, and the thing that emerged from the dark now explained why. It moved on too many joints, low and wide, its back a ridge of fused vertebrae like the spine of some crocodilian god, its face a smear of mouths where a face should have been. 6, 7, more, opening and closing in staggered rhythm, each one venting a wet, gasping moan that Tanabe's body understood as fear, before his mind understood it as sound. He had read the classification once, in a briefing he'd hoped never to need. A rot devil, born from decay too total and too widespread for anyone to name a source. It was not supposed to be operational this far into the city grid. It was not supposed to be this large. The rot devil's shadow fell across the crater, across the stranger standing in it, across Tanabe's car, and every fluorescent light along 200 meters of highway guttered and died at once, as if the devil's presence had simply switched off the concept of illumination. Tanabe did what 14 years of training told him to do. He did not shoot. Bullets against something that size were an insult, not a weapon. He keyed his radio, voice cracking through professional calm despite himself. "Command, this is Checkpoint 7-2. We have a Class A incursion. Repeat, Class A. Requesting immediate." The stranger moved before the devil did. He did not run. There was no visible transition between standing still and being gone, no blur the eye could track and reconstruct after the fact. One instant he stood in the crater with his arms at his sides, and the next he was above the rot devil's central mass, one fist already descending, and the sound the impact made was not a punch. It was a detonation, a shock wave that rolled outward and flattened the drainage grating across 4 lanes, and threw Tanabe's own body against the side of his cruiser hard enough to crack a rib, and where the rot devil's back had been, there was now simply a crater of its own, black ichor boiling up out of ruptured flesh, 7 mouths screaming in staggered, discordant horror. It should have been dead. Devils did not survive strikes like that. Tanabe had seen Division veterans spend entire engagements chipping away at lesser threats with everything they had, and never land a blow with a fraction of that violence in it. But the rot devil, wounded past any sane threshold, simply reformed. Flesh sluiced back across the wound like something being poured, the mouths realigning, the crocodile spine knitting whole, because that was the nature of a devil born from decay. It could not be killed by force alone, not by anything that did not understand what it was killing. The stranger landed back on the cratered asphalt, unbothered, and studied his own fist as if checking it for damage rather than results. "Interesting," he said, in that same clipped, translated cadence. And there was something in his voice that Tanabe, flat on his back, blood in his mouth, staring up at a sky gone the color of an old bruise, understood with total clarity, was not fear. It was curiosity. The man had just struck something with force enough to level a city block, watched it come back whole, and instead of alarm, his mouth had curled into something that was almost, horribly, a smile. "You regenerate," the stranger said, to the devil, in a tone that suggested he was speaking to something worth the effort of speech. "Good, that means I don't have to hold back." The rot devil answered with all 7 mouths at once, a chorus of moaning dread that rolled across the highway like a physical weight, and Tanabe felt his own hands go numb around his radio, felt the specific paralytic terror that Division 4 training called fear bleed, the ambient horror devils projected simply by existing at scale, a weapon that worked on the mind before it ever touched the body. He had felt it before, from lesser things, and it had always worked. Rookies wept. Veterans hesitated. It was, Division 4's doctrine held, the single universal constant of every devil engagement. Everything that lived, feared. The stranger did not so much as blink. He raised one hand, palm out, unhurried, almost bored, and the air around his fingers began to hum with a light that had no business existing outdoors. A compressed, furious blue-white glow that built and built until it was the only true color left on the highway, washing the wreckage and the dying street lamps and the terrified officer bleeding against his cruiser, all in the same cold radiance. "Whatever that was supposed to do," the stranger said, almost conversationally, To a monster that could not understand him, and did not need to. It didn't. The blast that left his palm was not an explosion, so much as an argument the world lost. It crossed the distance to the rot devil in less time than the eye could resolve motion, and where the devil had stood there was, for one full second, simply light. A column of blue-white fire punching through flesh and asphalt and the drainage tunnel beneath it, and the bedrock beneath that, boiling upward into the storm clouds and turning the belly of the sky the color of a dying star. When the light guttered out, the underpass was gone. Not damaged, gone. A crater 40 meters across, sunk 3 stories into the earth, its edges still glowing orange at the rim, cooling asphalt hissing where rain met scorched stone. There was no ichor left to reform. There was no regeneration to speak of, because there was nothing left of the rot devil large enough to regenerate from. Tanabe, ribs screaming, radio slack in his numb hand, understood in that moment that he had just watched something erase a devil that his entire division, mobilized in full, might not have been able to kill in a week of engagement. The stranger lowered his hand, exhaled once through his nose. Not exertion, Tanabe would realize later, reviewing the footage a dozen times, but something closer to mild disappointment, and turned his attention, for the first time since he'd fallen from the sky, fully toward the one human being still capable of standing near him. You. The translated word carried an edge Tanabe felt in his spine. You're the local authority. It was not a question. Tanabe, blood on his teeth, sidearm still somehow gripped in his hand, though every instinct told him it was worth nothing here, forced himself upright against the ruined cruiser. Special Division 4, he managed. Public safety. You just... He gestured, uselessly at the crater where 3 stories of drainage infrastructure had been. You just leveled a city block. It was in my way. The stranger's eyes swept the wreckage. The dead streetlights. The rain hissing against still glowing stone, with the same appraising contempt he'd first turned on the skyline. This world is weaker than I expected. Whatever passed for a threat here just came apart like wet paper. A pause. Calculating, cold. Where is the strongest thing you have? Not the strongest monster, the strongest fight. Tanabe did not answer immediately, because there was no answer he was authorized to give, and no answer, honestly, that he possessed. Command needed to know. Command needed to know an hour ago. His hand found the radio again, thumb pressing the transmit key with fingers that would not stop shaking. Command. Checkpoint 7-2, the Class A threat is neutralized. His voice cracked on the word neutralized, because it was true, and because it was the smallest word he had for what he'd just witnessed. But we have a new incursion. Unknown origin. Not a devil. I don't think it's a devil. Humanoid. Extreme output. He swallowed. He just erased a rot devil in one strike. I need everyone. I need Kishibe. I need Makima. I need command. I don't know what I'm looking at, but it just told me it's looking for a fight, and I don't think we have anything that qualifies. Static answered him for 3 full seconds before the response came, clipped and disbelieving, relayed up a chain that would, within the hour, reach a woman in a black suit who received unprecedented information the way other people received weather reports, with mild professional interest, and the beginnings of a plan already forming behind pale amber eyes. The stranger, Vegeta, though no one on this world yet had a name to put to him, crossed his arms over his chest and looked up at the torn, bleeding sky he'd fallen from, and allowed himself, for the first time since arrival, something almost like satisfaction. Not because the fight had been good. It hadn't. It had been an insult, over before it deserved to be. But somewhere in this ruined, dread-soaked city, someone was already scrambling every resource they had to answer the only question he'd bothered to ask. That, at least, meant they understood what he was. It would take them considerably longer to understand what he wanted, and longer still to understand that in the version of this world where Vegeta had landed, the question of who ruled Tokyo's shadows was no longer settled by contracts, fear, or the slow, patient architecture of devils and their hunters. It had, in the space of 4 minutes, become a question of strength, spoken in a language this world had never had to learn. 3 kilometers south, in an office with the blinds drawn against a city that had just gotten considerably more dangerous, Makima set down her tea, folded her hands, and smiled at nothing in particular. The debrief room on Special Division 4's 4th floor smelled the way it always did after a bad night. Burnt coffee, wet wool, the metallic ghost of blood that never quite left uniforms no matter how many times they went through the wash. But Aki Hayakawa had never seen it this crowded at 2 in the morning. Every senior hunter still breathing in the Tokyo office had been called in. Power sat on the edge of a table with her boots up, uncharacteristically quiet, which told Aki more about the mood in the room than anything on the briefing screen. Denji had his arms crossed and kept glancing at the door like he expected something to come through it. And in the front row, unbothered, unreadable, sat Kishibe, watching grainy checkpoint footage loop for the 4th time with the flat patience of a man who had survived long enough to stop being surprised by anything, except, perhaps, this. The footage was bad, half of it corrupted by the electromagnetic wash of whatever the stranger's final attack had put out, but what survived was enough. A crater, a pillar of blue-white fire punching through 3 stories of infrastructure, a rot devil, gone. Play it again, Kishibe said, for the 5th time, and no one argued. Makima stood at the front of the room, hands folded, watching the footage with the same expression she wore for budget reviews and executions alike, pleasant, patient, entirely without visible strain. When the clip ended, she didn't ask for it again. She had seen enough the first time. Ryosuke Tanabe is in surgery, she said. 2 cracked ribs, a collapsed lung, moderate concussion. He'll live. He's also the only person in this building who's spoken directly to our new arrival, so when he's stable, I want a full transcript, word for word, including tone. Her gaze moved across the room, unhurried. In the meantime, we have 4 confirmed facts. 1. He is not a devil, a fiend, or anything our classification framework currently accounts for. No fear signature, no contract residue, nothing our sensitivity wards registered until the moment he physically arrived. 2. He generated an attack capable of erasing a Class A rot devil in a single exchange, which by itself would place him above every asset currently in this division, except perhaps 1. Her eyes flicked, briefly, warmly, to Kishibe, who did not react. 3. His first and, so far, only stated goal was to locate what he called the strongest fight this world has to offer. And 4. She paused, and something in the pause made even Power sit up straighter. He has not attacked anyone who hasn't put themselves between him and that goal. Tanabe is alive because Tanabe stepped back. The rot devil is not, because the rot devil was in his path, so he's not hostile, Denji said, in the tone of someone hoping very badly to be told he was right. He's not indiscriminate, Makima corrected gently. That's a different thing, and a more dangerous one. An indiscriminate threat we contain with numbers and attrition, a discriminating one we have to understand, because the moment we stop being useless to him, or start being an obstacle, the calculation changes. She let that settle. I want him found before he finds something worth destroying on his own terms. Kishibe. He's not devil adjacent. Kishibe spoke for the first time, arms crossed, eyes still on the frozen frame of the crater. Fear doesn't touch him. Tanabe's report says the rot devil hit him with a full moan chorus fear bleed at close range, and he didn't so much as flinch. That's not toughness. That's a mind fear can't get a grip on, which in 30 years I have seen exactly never. He finally looked up, and there was something in the old hunter's face that Aki had genuinely never seen there before. Not fear, exactly, but its cousin, the sober arithmetic of a man recalculating what the top of the food chain might actually look like. Whatever he is, he didn't come from anywhere fear-built. That makes him a genuine unknown. I don't like genuine unknowns. Nobody does, Makima said, which is why I want him treated as a priority contact, not a priority threat, unless he demonstrates otherwise. Denji, Power, Aki, you're with me. Kishibe, I want you close but not visible. If this becomes a fight, I want our best asset held in reserve, not our first move. She smiled, small and pleasant, the kind of smile that had ended careers and worse. Something tells me a man who wants a good fight will be considerably harder to manage if the first face he sees belongs to someone who could actually give him one. They found Vegeta 4 hours later, not because Division 4 tracked him down, but because he had grown bored of waiting and started making himself impossible to miss. He stood in the center of a shuttered pachinko parlor's parking lot in Shinjuku, ankle-deep in the wreckage of what had, an hour earlier, been a vampire devil's feeding nest, a lesser predator that had made the catastrophic error of mistaking him for prey and had, in the 90 seconds since, ceased entirely to be a going concern. He was not even looking at the mess when the Division 4 van pulled up at a respectful distance, headlights washing over rain-slicked asphalt and scattered devil residue. He was looking up, at the neon-choked, rain-hazed skyline, arms crossed, an expression on his face that a very patient observer might have called restless disappointment. Makima stepped out of the van first, unhurried. An umbrella she didn't strictly need opened over her head more as a piece of theater than a necessity, and crossed the lot toward him with the loose, confident stride of someone who had never once in her existence walked toward a threat, rather than allowed one to walk toward her. "You've been busy," she said, in fluent, unaccented Japanese that the earpiece translator in Vegeta's ear rendered, a half-second later, into something his mind understood natively. A small mercy of whatever cosmic mechanism had dropped him here, that he hadn't questioned, and didn't intend to start now. Vegeta's eyes cut to her, assessing, and dismissed her within a second, not out of contempt exactly, but out of the practiced ease of a man who had spent a lifetime instantly separating threats from formalities. She read as neither, and that, more than anything, made him look again. "You're not like the others," he said. "The one who talked to me before, the officer, he had fear in him he couldn't hide. You don't." "I've found fear is rarely useful," Makima said. "I'm told you're looking for a fight. I'm told this world doesn't have one." Vegeta's voice was flat, edged with the particular boredom of a man 3 planets deep into disappointment. "2 devils, both dead before they finished introducing themselves. If this is the strongest your world offers, I came a very long way for nothing." Behind Makima, Aki felt his jaw tighten, and beside him, Power actually growled, low and genuine, offended on behalf of every fiend and devil she'd ever respected. Denji said nothing, but his hand had found the pull-cord scar at his chest, an old reflex he wasn't even aware he was performing. "2 devils is a poor sample," Makima said, unbothered by the growl at her side. "Unbothered by anything. This world has depths you haven't seen. Devils born from humanity's oldest and deepest fears. Darkness, control, war, famine, death. Devils that don't simply attack you. Devils that unmake what you understand about the fight before the fight begins." A pause, precise as a scalpel. "You said fear doesn't touch you. I believe that. I'd be curious to see if it's true against something built entirely from what the human species is most afraid of, rather than something merely large." Something in Vegeta's expression shifted, not softened, never that, but sharpened, focused, the restless disappointment narrowing into something closer to interest. "You're offering me a fight." "I'm offering you information," Makima said, smiling in a way that made even Kishibe, watching from a rooftop 200 meters distant through a rifle scope he had no intention of using, go very still. "What you do with it is entirely yours to decide. But I'll say this plainly, because I think you'd respect plainness more than flattery. This world is not weak. You've simply been fighting the wrong things. I can introduce you to the right ones, or I can leave you to find them yourself, which, given the last 4 hours, seems likely to involve considerably more collateral damage to a city that hasn't done anything to earn your contempt. Vegeta studied her for a long moment, rain sliding off his armor, off the wreckage around them, off a city that had no idea it was being weighed and measured by a mind that had, in its own universe, weighed and measured entire star systems, and found most of them wanting. "You're not afraid of me," he said finally. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Makima agreed. "Should I be?" And here, for the first time since he'd fallen out of a torn sky and into a world running on rules he didn't recognize, Vegeta did something none of Division 4's briefing had prepared any of them for. He laughed, short, sharp, genuinely startled out of him, and something in the tension of the parking lot broke, not into safety, exactly, but into a different, stranger kind of danger. The danger of two beings who each, in their own universe, had built entire philosophies around never being the one who blinked first, recognizing something of themselves in the other. "Fine," Vegeta said. "Show me your monsters, woman, but understand this." He pointed, a single finger, at the center of her chest, at a spot Aki would swear afterward had been chosen with unnerving precision. "The moment one of them bores me the way those two did, I stop asking politely. And the moment I decide you're the interesting thing in this city instead of your devils," the finger didn't move, "you'll wish you'd left me in that crater." "Noted," Makima said, entirely unbothered, and turned to lead him back toward the van, already 3 moves ahead in a game only she yet understood was being played. "Aki, Denji, power. This is our new asset for the foreseeable future. Try not to provoke him unnecessarily." "Try not to provoke him," Power repeated under her breath, staring at the crater that used to be a vampire devil's nest, at the man who'd made it, at the utterly unbothered woman walking beside him like he was a mildly interesting stray dog, rather than something that had leveled infrastructure in a single afternoon. "This lady's gonna get us all killed." Denji, watching Vegeta fold himself into the back of the division van with the wary economy of a predator sizing up unfamiliar terrain, found he couldn't entirely disagree, and found, underneath the fear, something he recognized uncomfortably well from his own reflection: the specific, dangerous thrill of being near something that could kill you effortlessly, and hadn't decided yet whether it planned to. Somewhere above Tokyo, the storm that had carried Vegeta through the tear in the sky finally began to break, and the first true stars in a week showed faintly through the clouds, as if the city itself understood, dimly, that whatever settled account was coming for it, it would not be settled quietly. Special Division 4's underground briefing hall was not built for a man like Vegeta. Aki noticed it within the first 10 minutes. The low ceilings meant for people who spent their careers ducking rather than standing tall. The fluorescent lights that buzzed just faintly enough to be an irritant rather than a hazard. The reinforced walls that had, in 6 years of service, stopped precisely nothing that Aki had ever seen bother to test them. Vegeta stood in the center of it with his arms crossed, radiating the specific, coiled impatience of a predator being shown a menu instead of a meal, while Makima ran through case files projected against the far wall with the same unhurried calm she brought to everything. "The gun devil," she said, and the image that appeared, grainy, satellite distance, a silhouette vast enough to blot out a highway, made even Power go quiet. Responsible, directly and indirectly, for more human deaths than any other devil currently active. Its exact strength is unknown because no engagement with it has produced survivors capable of reporting accurately. We don't know where it is. We don't know when it will surface again. She let the image linger. That is the kind of threat this world produces at its worst. I show it to you not because I expect you to fight it today, but so you understand the scale of what you've stepped into. Vegeta's eyes narrowed at the image, weighing it the way he weighed everything, not with fear, Aki was coming to realize, but with something closer to professional interest, a warrior's assessment of an opponent's file before the opponent themselves ever arrived. Power without shape, he said finally. A weapon, not a warrior. I've fought things like that before. They're dangerous because of scale, not skill. He looked away from the screen, dismissive again, already bored of a threat he couldn't yet touch. Show me something that fights back with intention. Makima's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A small, private recalibration, the sort a chess player makes upon realizing their opponent has just, unprompted, described exactly the piece they intended to move next. As it happens, she said, there's a matter that requires exactly that. She changed the projection. A different case file, a different silhouette. This one humanoid, cloaked, weapon-bearing, moving through frame-by-frame surveillance footage with an unnatural, gliding economy that made Aki's stomach tighten even on a fourth viewing. A primal devil variant, active in the Nagoya corridor for the last 11 days, Makima said. Unlike the gun devil, this one hunts with intelligence. It selects targets, adapts to countermeasures, and has, in 3 engagements, killed a total of 9 devil hunters, including 2 Special Division veterans. Its fear category isn't fully classified, but our analysts believe it draws on something close to primal hunting instinct, the fear an animal feels being stalked by something smarter than itself. She glanced at Vegeta, precise as a blade finding a seam in armor. It would, I think, qualify as something that fights back with intention. For the first time since arriving in this world, Vegeta's mouth curved into something that was, unmistakably, anticipation. Now we're getting somewhere. There's a condition, Makima said, before he could turn toward the door, and something in her tone, still pleasant, still unhurried, made even Kishibe, silent in the corner of the room where he'd stood the entire briefing without contributing a word, glance up with new attention. You go in alongside a team. Not because I doubt your strength, I don't, not anymore, not after what's left of that parking lot, but because this devil has killed 9 trained hunters by exploiting exactly the kind of overconfidence that makes a single powerful entity walk into unfamiliar terrain alone. I'd rather not add a 10th name to that list out of stubbornness. Yours or theirs. Vegeta's jaw tightened, pride visibly warring with the specific, grudging respect he'd developed over the last several hours for a woman who had, so far, never once told him something that turned out to be false. I don't need babysitters. They're not babysitters. Makima's gaze moved, deliberately, to Denji, to Power, to Aki. They're a devil hunting team that has survived situations this world considers unsurvivable, more than once, through cooperation rather than raw output. I'm not asking you to rely on their strength. I'm asking you to extend them the same courtesy you'd extend a fellow warrior on your own world. The assumption that survival this long means something. It was, Aki understood watching Vegeta's face, a very specific kind of argument, aimed with surgical precision at the one thing that could move a man like this where threats and flattery both would fail. Not fear, not command, but a warrior's code, however alien its origin, recognizing an echo of itself in someone else's framing. Vegeta was silent for a long moment, then short and clipped. Fine, but if they slow me down, I'm not waiting. Wouldn't dream of asking you to, Makima said, and turned to lead them all toward the vehicles. Already 3 moves ahead of a game, the rest of the room was only now beginning to understand they were playing. The Nagoya corridor at midnight was a landscape of half-abandoned industrial sprawl, rusted gantries and dead factory floors lit only by the sodium orange of highway lamps still running on emergency power. And it was here, in the gutted shell of a defunct textile plant, that the team finally found what had been hunting Special Division hunters for 11 days. It came at them the way Makima's file had promised, not with the brute announcement of the wrought devil, but with a silence that felt deliberate, a predator's patience, until Power's warning shout was the only thing that saved Denji from a killing blow that came out of shadow too fast for human eyes to track. The devil that emerged into the gantry light was lean, wrong-angled, its limbs too long and too many-jointed. A face like a fox skull stretched across something that had once, perhaps, resembled a wolf. Eyes the flat black of a hunting animal that had stopped needing to blink centuries ago. Chainsaw Man, it said. The first devil any of them had encountered in months, capable of speech. Its voice a wet, layered rasp. 3 registers speaking slightly out of sync with each other. And guests. How generous of Division 4, sending me fresh trophies. Denji's chainsaw ripped free with its familiar tearing roar, and Power's claws lengthened, blood already gathering black and thick at her fingertips, and Aki's grip found the hilt of his contract blade. But it was Vegeta who stepped forward first, unhurried, arms still loosely crossed, studying the devil with the calm, professional interest of a man finally being shown something worth his time. "You talk," Vegeta said. "Good. That means you'll understand what I'm about to tell you." His stance shifted, weight settling low, the air around him beginning, faintly, to hum. "I've killed things faster than you. I've killed things stronger than you. What I haven't found on this miserable, waterlogged planet is anything that made me work for it." A thin, humorless smile. "You have 30 seconds to convince me you're not a third disappointment." The devil's fox skull face split into something that might have been a grin, might have been simple anatomy, and it moved. What followed was, by Aki's own later account, given in a debrief that took 4 hours and left even Kishibe uncharacteristically quiet, the fastest and most genuinely dangerous exchange he had ever witnessed at close range. The devil was not merely fast. It read intention, anticipated angles before they were thrown, twisted through gaps in Vegeta's guard that shouldn't have existed for something moving at his speed. It opened 3 shallow wounds across his forearm in the first exchange alone. The first blood, Aki realized with a jolt, that anyone had drawn from this man since his arrival. And for one suspended half-second, the devil's black eyes flickered with something that, in a human, would have been triumph. Vegeta looked down at the cuts, at the thin lines of blood welling along his own forearm, and Aki, watching his face in the strobing gantry light, understood he was witnessing something closer to a man being handed a gift than a man being wounded. "There it is," Vegeta said, and the humming air around him ignited into gold. The transformation was instant this time. No build-up, no ceremony. Hair igniting to blazing gold, aura roaring outward hard enough to shatter the factory's remaining windows and send Power stumbling half a step back despite standing 10 meters clear of it. And when Vegeta moved again, it was at a speed the fox skull devil, for all its predator's instinct, simply could not read. The exchange that had taken 30 seconds to draw 3 shallow cuts took less than 4 to end entirely. A single strike to the devil's ribs that folded it around Vegeta's fist with an audible wet violence, followed by a rising knee that sent it through 2 support gantries and out through the factory's rusted roof into the rain-soaked dark beyond. It tried to reform. Aki saw it happening in real time through the shattered ceiling, black ichor gathering, reweaving, the fox skull face beginning to knit itself whole in the sodium light. And Vegeta was already there, above it, both hands cupped and glowing with that same furious blue-white light that had erased the Rot Devil's underpass 6 hours earlier. "Not this time," Vegeta said, and the blast that followed turned the remaining half of the factory roof to slag and left. When the light faded and the rain hissed against newly molten metal, nothing behind that any devil, however resilient, could reasonably reconstruct itself from. Silence settled over the ruined plant, broken only by the hiss of rain on hot steel and Denji's slow, disbelieving exhale. Vegeta descended back through the shattered roof, hair fading from gold to black, the shallow cuts on his forearm already, visibly, healing, faster than any of them, even Kishibe, would later be able to satisfactorily explain to Division Command, and looked down at his own arm with an expression that was, for the first time since Aki had met him, something close to genuine satisfaction rather than mere lack of disappointment. "That," Vegeta said, flexing his hand, watching the last of the wound close, "is the first thing on this planet that made me bleed." He looked up, past the wrecked gantries, toward the distant glow of Tokyo on the horizon, toward a city he'd arrived intending to judge and had, somewhere in the last several hours, begun, reluctantly, almost against his own inclination, to reconsider. "Your world isn't as weak as I thought," he admitted, to no one in particular, and there was, in the words, the specific grudging respect of a man revising an opinion he'd been fully prepared to defend to the last. "It's just been hiding its teeth." Power, still catching her breath, staring at the crater where a devil that had killed 9 hunters had simply ceased to exist in under 5 seconds, found her voice first. "Yeah, well," she managed, equal parts awed and offended on principle. "Maybe warn a girl before you go turning gold and blowing the roof off the building next time." Denji, chainsaw still idling in his hands, said nothing at all, just looked at Vegeta and then at the crater, and understood with the particular clarity of someone who had spent his whole life being the strongest thing in most rooms he entered, that for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was standing next to something that made even that feel small. 3 kilometers north, in a car parked at a discreet, patient distance, Makima watched the gold light fade from the horizon through her window, set down the phone she'd been using to relay real-time updates up a chain of command that had, within the hour, begun asking questions considerably above Division 4's pay grade, and allowed herself, quietly, the particular satisfaction of a woman who had just confirmed exactly what she'd suspected the moment she first saw the checkpoint footage. That the balance of power in this world had shifted, decisively, and that the shift had a name, a temper, and, more usefully than either, a very specific, very exploitable hunger for a fight this world had not yet fully shown him. Good, she thought, and began, already, composing the next test. 3 days passed before Makima's next move revealed itself, and in that time, Special Division 4 changed in ways that no memo ever formally announced but everyone quietly understood. Vegeta didn't sleep in any bed the division offered him. He trained instead, in the reinforced sub-level gymnasium, built originally to withstand fiend containment breaches, and the sound of his ki tearing through concrete at 3 in the morning became, for the junior staff on night rotation, a strange kind of lullaby, proof that whatever else went wrong in this city, the thing capable of erasing Class A devils in a single strike was, for the moment, on their side of the ledger. Aki found him there on the 3rd night, unable to sleep himself, and stood in the gymnasium doorway for a long moment watching Vegeta run through forms against nothing, strikes and blocks and feints against an opponent only he could see, movements too fast to fully track even standing still and watching for it. "You don't stop," Aki said, finally, when Vegeta's eyes flicked toward him, acknowledging his presence without breaking rhythm. "Stopping is how you lose." Vegeta's voice was flat, unbothered by the late hour, by the sweat soaking through his undershirt, by anything at all. "On my world there was a boy, my rival, though he'd never have called himself that, too soft for words like rival. He surpassed me more times than I care to count, and every single time, it was because I stopped, got comfortable, decided I'd trained enough." A brief pause, weight settling into his stance for another combination. "I don't make that mistake anymore." Aki considered that. Considered the specific, exhausted discipline of a man who had apparently spent an entire life chasing a ceiling that kept rising just out of reach, and found, unexpectedly, that he understood it better than he'd expected to. "The devil that killed 9 of our hunters, the one from Nagoya, you called it the first thing that made you bleed. Was that a compliment? It was information. Vegeta's strikes didn't slow. A compliment implies I care what it thinks of itself. I don't. I care whether it taught me something I didn't already know. He finally stopped, breathing controlled, and turned fully to face Aki for the first time in the conversation. You've survived things that should have killed you. Twice, according to your file, which I read, because I don't trust reports I haven't verified myself. What's kept you alive isn't strength. You're not the strongest thing in this building, not close. It's that you keep getting up. A short, assessing look, almost approving. That's a rarer trait than strength. Strength is common. I've met 100 men stronger than they had any right to be who folded the first time something hurt worse than they expected. It was, Aki would reflect later, the closest thing to a compliment Vegeta had offered anyone in the division, and it was delivered with the same flat, clinical honesty he brought to everything, which was, Aki was beginning to understand exactly why it landed as hard as it did. Vegeta didn't flatter. He assessed. And being found, even briefly, not wanting in that assessment carried a weight that easy praise never could have. It was into this fragile, forming trust that Makima's summons arrived the following morning, and it arrived with a weight that made the previous 3 days' calm feel, in retrospect, like the held breath before a blow. The briefing room was fuller than Aki had ever seen it, not just Division 4's senior staff, but faces he recognized from liaison postings, from the international desk, even one grim, silent woman in a U.S. Mobile Squad uniform who'd clearly been flown in overnight and hadn't slept since. Kishibe stood near the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable in a way that Aki had learned, over years of service, meant the old hunter already knew something the rest of the room didn't. Makima stood at the front, and for the first time since Vegeta's arrival, her composure carried something that might, in anyone else, have been called urgency. 8 hours ago, she said, without preamble, a contract exchange facility in Osaka went dark. Not attacked. Dark. All 41 staff and contracted devils inside simply gone. No bodies. No residue. No fear signature large enough to explain it. 40 minutes ago, we received confirmation from a surviving contact on site who'd stepped out for a cigarette at the wrong, or right, moment. She let the pause stretch, and Aki felt the room's attention sharpen to a single point. The famine devil has surfaced, fully. Not a fragment, not a proxy. The genuine article, active for the first time in recorded history, and moving north toward Tokyo at a pace our satellite tracking suggests will bring it to the outer wards within 18 hours. The silence that followed was total. Even power, rarely quiet about anything, said nothing at all. For those who need the context, Makima continued, famine is one of 4 devils, alongside war, death, and my own domain, control, old enough and feared enough across every culture on this planet that we classify them separately from every other threat this world has ever produced. We have no confirmed instance of any devil hunter, of any nation, surviving direct contact with famine. What we have instead is a pattern. Everywhere it passes, hunger becomes total, absolute, and self-consuming. Crops, livestock, water, eventually the very cells of anyone caught in its radius, unmade from the inside by a need that cannot be satisfied, because satisfaction was never the point. It does not fight the way other devils fight. It simply exists, and existing near it is, itself, the attack. Vegeta, seated at the back of the room with his arms crossed, had not said a word since the briefing began. But Aki, watching him, saw something shift behind his eyes. Not fear, never that, but the specific, focused stillness of a man recalculating an opponent's file for the 3rd time in a week, and finding, this time, that the numbers actually troubled him. You said fear doesn't touch you, Makima said, turning to him directly, and every eye in the room followed. I believe that's true. But famine's weapon isn't fear in the way the Rot Devil's was, or even the Nagoya Devil's precision. It doesn't ask your mind to be afraid. It simply asks your body to need food, water, warmth, breath, past any threshold your biology can survive, regardless of what your mind believes about itself. Her gaze was level, entirely without theater now, the pleasant mask set aside for something closer to honest calculation. I don't know if Saiyan physiology is vulnerable to that kind of unmaking. Neither, I suspect, do you. Vegeta was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the boredom, none of the contempt that had defined every word he'd spoken since falling out of the sky. No, he admitted, flat and honest in a way Aki hadn't yet heard from him. I don't. Then here is the choice, Makima said, and something in her tone made clear this was, finally, the moment every careful test of the last 3 days had been building toward. I could ask you to fight this. Given what I've seen from you, I believe you might genuinely be this world's best chance of surviving contact with something 4 separate nations' hunter divisions have quietly agreed cannot be fought conventionally. But I won't pretend the risk isn't real, or that I fully understand what I'd be asking you to walk into. She paused, and for once, the pause felt less like strategy and more like something almost sincere. You don't answer to me. You never have. Not really. Whatever paperwork Division 4 has drawn up around your presence here. So I'm asking, not ordering. Will you fight it? The room held its breath. Aki, Denji, Power, the exhausted American liaison, even Kishibe, whose stillness had sharpened into something that looked for the first time in the entire briefing like genuine attention rather than professional patience. Vegeta rose slowly from his seat, and the restless, contemptuous boredom that had defined him since the moment he'd fallen from a torn sky was gone, replaced by something colder and considerably more familiar to anyone who'd ever studied the specific pride of a warrior who had spent a lifetime refusing to be the one who backed down. You've been testing me since the parking lot, he said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was, Aki realized with something like awe, closer to respect. Every devil you've shown me, every briefing, every careful little escalation, you wanted to know exactly how strong I was before you showed me something that actually mattered. A thin, humorless smile. I'd be angry if I hadn't done the exact same thing to weaker fighters my entire life. Does that mean yes? Makima asked, and for the first time, there was something almost like genuine uncertainty in the question. It means, Vegeta said, and the air around him began, low and building, to hum with the first threads of gold, that you picked exactly the right bait, woman. A devil old enough that 4 nations are too afraid to name it a fight. His eyes, dark and sharp and entirely without contempt now, found the window, found the northern horizon where somewhere, 18 hours out, something ancient and starving was walking toward a city that had no idea what it was about to face. I didn't come to this miserable, waterlogged planet to die comfortable and unchallenged. If this famine of yours is really what 4 divisions are too frightened to test, then it's the first honest answer to the only question I asked when I got here. He turned, gold light beginning to bleed through his hair, through the coiled tension of his shoulders, and looked back at the room. At Aki, at Denji, at Power, at Kishibe's sharpened attention, at Makima's carefully composed, carefully satisfied calm. 18 hours, Vegeta said. Get me everything you know about it. Every engagement, every survivor's account, every scrap of pattern your analysts have pulled from 40 years of terrified guessing. The gold light steadied, then, deliberately, receded. Banked, not spent. A fire held in reserve, rather than let loose. Because when it reaches this city, I intend to find out, once and for all, whether this world actually has a ceiling, or whether everyone here has simply been too afraid to test it. Makima's smile, when it came, was small, genuine, and, for a woman who had spent 3 days carefully, patiently, ruthlessly maneuvering a multiversal warrior into exactly the position she'd wanted him in from the moment his checkpoint footage first crossed her desk, entirely without performance. "Then let's not waste the 18 hours we have," she said, and the room, understanding without being told that everything before this moment had been prologue, began, at last, to move. Tokyo's northern wards emptied in the 11 hours that followed, an evacuation carried out with the grim, practiced efficiency of a city that had, across its long and blood-soaked history with devils, learned exactly how to move its population without ever quite admitting to them what they were being moved away from. Official broadcasts called it a gas leak. The people old enough to remember previous Primal Tier incidents packed their cars in silence and didn't ask questions they already knew the honest answers to. Aki spent the hours before contact the way he'd spent every deployment since his first, checking gear that didn't need checking, running scenarios that all ended, in his own private calculations, with a survival rate he chose not to say aloud. Power spent them loud and restless, picking fights with vending machines and anyone unwise enough to make eye contact, which Aki had long since learned was simply how she carried fear when she refused to name it as fear. Denji spent them quiet, chainsaw resting against his shoulder, watching Vegeta train alone in the reinforced lot behind the staging perimeter with an expression Aki couldn't quite read, something between envy and relief that whatever came next, he wasn't the strongest thing standing between it and the city, for once in his short, violent life. Vegeta himself said almost nothing in those final hours. He trained, methodically, without wasted motion, and when Makima finally approached him at the edge of the staging perimeter, with the last of the analyst briefings, thin, inadequate documents built from 40 years of half-glimpsed, terrified fragments, he read them once, fully, in silence, and handed them back without comment. "That's everything we have," Makima said. "It's not enough," Vegeta said, "but it never is, before something like this." He looked north, toward a horizon that had, in the last hour, begun to carry a wrongness that even untrained eyes could sense. Birds falling silent for kilometers in every direction, the temperature dropping in a way no weather system could explain. A hunger in the air itself that pressed against the mind like a held breath. I've fought 2 other devils this world produced and found them lacking. If this is genuinely the best your world has to throw at me, I intend to enjoy finding out. A pause, and something in his voice, for just a moment, carried less bravado than it had at any point since his arrival. And if it isn't, if this is finally something that actually tests me, then at least I'll have died doing something worth the trip. Makima said nothing to that. There was, for once, nothing clever left to say. The famine devil arrived not as an image on satellite tracking but as an absence, a silence that swallowed the northern ward whole, streetlights flickering and dying in a rolling wave, the ambient hum of a sleeping city's machinery stuttering to nothing as it passed, block by block, drawing every particle of warmth and moisture and possibility out of everything in its path. When it finally came into visual range of the staging perimeter, Aki understood immediately why 4 nations had quietly agreed never to test it directly. It did not look like a monster built for combat. It was tall, gaunt beyond anatomy, a figure wrapped in robes the color of old famine photographs, its face a hollow of shadow beneath a hood, its hands, too many joints, fingers like desiccated roots, trailing slightly above the cracked, frost-rimed asphalt as it moved. It did not run. It did not need to. Everything around it simply began, slowly and then all at once, to starve. The grass along the median curling brown and dying in seconds. A stray dog 200 meters distant collapsing mid-stride, its body visibly, horrifyingly gaunt within the span of a single breath. "Contact in 10 seconds, Kishibe's voice crackled over comms, flat and controlled despite the horror unfolding on every screen at the staging perimeter. Everyone not designated engagement. Fall back to the outer cordon. Now. Vegeta didn't wait for 10 seconds. He was airborne before the countdown reached 5, a streak of gold cutting north through the dying evening light, and closed the distance to the famine devil in under 2. The first exchange told Aki everything he needed to know about why this devil had gone unfought for 40 years. Vegeta's opening strike, the same casual, devastating force that had erased a rot devil in a single blow, passed through the creature's robed form as though it were smoke, connecting with nothing, and the moment his fist crossed the space where its chest should have been, Aki watched, through binoculars from 2 kilometers back, Vegeta's entire body seize, gold aura guttering, as something vast and wordless reached into him and simply began, with total, patient indifference, to take. Vegeta staggered back through the air, and even from this distance, the change was visible. His aura, so steady and controlled through every prior engagement, flickering now like a candle in wind, his breathing suddenly ragged over the comm relay Kishibe had rigged to capture the fight's audio. "It's not attacking," Vegeta's voice came through, strained, furious, disbelieving. "It's feeding." "Confirmed." Makima's voice cut in, calm despite the readouts scrolling red across every terminal at the staging perimeter. "Whatever contact you make with it, it converts to consumption. Your strength isn't being blocked, it's being eaten." "Then I stop making contact," Vegeta snarled, and the gold aura around him flared, not weaker now but harder, more concentrated, drawn inward rather than outward. And when his next attack came, it wasn't a strike. It was the same furious blue-white beam that had erased both prior devils. Fired from a distance, the famine devil's draining touch couldn't reach. The beam connected, and for one suspended second, Aki allowed himself to hope. The famine devil's robed form buckling under the impact, driven backward through 3 blocks of already frost-killed streetscape, its hollow-shadowed hood tearing at the edges like old paper. Then it simply reformed, robes knitting whole from the edges inward, and this time, when it moved again, it moved faster, no longer patient, no longer merely present, but hunting, closing the distance Vegeta had tried to establish with a speed that shouldn't have belonged to something that moved without visible legs. "It's adapting," Aki breathed, watching the readouts, watching Vegeta bank hard through the ruined skyline to keep distance he was steadily, inexorably losing. "It's learning from every hit." "No," came a new voice over the comm. Kishibe, who had, without announcement or permission, moved from his reserve position and was now sprinting north along a rooftop line toward the engagement, blade already drawn. "It's not learning, it's hungrier. Every attack it survives, every piece of him it manages to touch, it's not getting smarter, it's getting stronger, because it's had more to eat." Vegeta heard that too, apparently, because his next words came through the comm sharp with the specific, dangerous clarity of a warrior recalculating a losing strategy mid-fight. "Then I need to end this before it eats enough to matter. Not wound it. End it." Vegeta, Makima's voice, for the first time since Aki had known her, carried something that was almost alarm. "If direct contact feeds it, and ranged attacks only slow its regeneration, then I need something it can't eat and can't regenerate from." Vegeta cut in, already climbing, already gathering light into both palms in a way Aki had not seen before. Not the tight, controlled beam of his prior attacks, but something vaster, both hands drawn wide, gold aura roaring up around him in a column visible from the far side of the staging perimeter, bright enough to wash out every camera trained on the engagement. "Everyone still in the northern ward. Get out. Now. This is not going to be small." Kishibe's voice, sprinting, breathless for the first time Aki had ever heard. "Division. Evacuate the last cordon. All units. Immediate." The famine devil, sensing the building light the way a starving animal senses meat, surged forward through the ruined streets with a speed that closed the gap in seconds, robed arms spreading wide to close the distance and feed on the enormous, gathering power before it could fully form. And Vegeta, gold light building past anything Aki had witnessed in 3 days of watching this man work, did not retreat. Final flash. The words carried through the comm in a language the translator rendered strange and heavy, and the light that followed was not a beam so much as a verdict. A column of condensed, furious gold-white energy that didn't merely strike the famine devil but consumed the space it occupied, erasing 3 city blocks of already dead streetscape into glass smooth. Glowing slag in the same motion that tore through the devil's robed form with a violence that left no ambiguity, no smoke-thin dodge, no patient reforming. The light climbed skyward, bright enough that Aki, 2 kilometers back with binoculars pressed hard to his face, had to look away, tears streaming from the brightness alone. When it faded, the northern ward was gone, not devastated, but cleared. A smooth, cooling crater where streets and buildings had stood an hour before, steam rising off newly molten stone into a night sky finally, genuinely clear of the wrongness that had pressed against every mind in the city for the last 18 hours. There was no ichor, no regeneration, no lingering hunger in the air. Whatever the famine devil had been, old enough, feared enough, patient enough to go 40 years unchallenged. It was simply, entirely gone, in a way that even the most experienced hunters in the staging area understood, without needing to be told, had never happened to something of its tier before. Vegeta descended slowly into the crater's center, gold light fading from his hair, his aura, his stance, and for the first time since Aki had watched him fall out of a torn sky 4 days earlier, he looked, unmistakably, exhausted, not defeated, not even close, but spent, in a way that suggested even a Saiyan prince's reserves had limits this world had finally, genuinely found. He stood in the crater for a long moment, breathing hard, looking at the smooth, empty devastation around him. Proof, finally, undeniable and total, that he had found something on this waterlogged, unremarkable planet worth the effort of his full strength. There, he said, to no one, to everyone, to a city that would spend the next decade quietly rebuilding a ward it would never fully explain to its own citizens. That was worth the trip. Special Division 4 rebuilt the northern ward's outer cordon within the month, officially attributing the devastation to an unprecedented gas explosion. And the story, as these things always did in a city that had learned long ago how to survive without asking too many questions, was quietly, collectively believed because the alternative was unbearable to sit with for long. Vegeta stayed, not out of loyalty to Division 4, and certainly not out of any developed fondness for Makima's careful, patient maneuvering, though something like grudging respect had settled between them, that neither would ever admit to calling friendship. He stayed because a world that had produced something capable of drawing his full strength for the first time in longer than he cared to remember was a world worth watching, at least until something better came along, and because, somewhere in the quiet weeks that followed, training alongside Aki's stubborn persistence and Denji's reckless honesty and Power's chaotic, fearless pride, he had found something he hadn't expected to find on a planet he'd arrived intending only to judge. People worth the trouble of protecting, whether or not they were ever strong enough to matter to him. Kishibe never fully forgave himself for arriving 4 seconds too late to matter. Makima never stopped, quietly, testing exactly how far this new asset's loyalty could be bent before it broke, though for the first time in her long, patient calculations, she found herself, against every instinct, in no particular hurry to find that limit. And somewhere above Tokyo, on clear nights when the wards ran quiet and the fear that usually hummed beneath the city's skin fell briefly, blessedly silent, a Saiyan prince who had crossed universes looking for a fight worth having, stood on a rooftop overlooking a skyline he'd once dismissed as weak, arms crossed, watching the city breathe, and found, to his own considerable surprise, that he had no particular urge to leave it behind.